Good morning, and welcome to the Morning News Watch. Now till 9. Just tell your smart speaker you want to listen to News Radio WJPF.
WJPF News Radio 1340.
Really want to thank my first-time guest this morning. Paul Tracey is the CEO of Innovative Technologies. We want to talk a bit about camera privacy this morning. First off, Paul, thanks for starting your Monday with me.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a great conversation we should all be having.
Right, and because, one of the things, these door cameras, and there's lots more. Ring is one that a lot of people know about, and it's a good example. It's inexpensive. It's easy to set up, so it creates a prevalence. In fact, in 2021, 1.4 million Ring doorbells were sold. That's 1.4 million ways somebody can hack into your house, into your system.
That is true, and I, you mentioned Ring, and I think that's the biggest one because it got the most media attention, right? And they've since gone back and looked at their security further. But cameras are certainly an entry point for a hacker, and something we want to make sure that we have protected.
And that prevalence, and as I said, Ring is one of those that's it's very often used. I'm a Ring doorbell user. I use two-level authentication. Does that mean I'm safe, Paul?
Well, it certainly gives you a higher degree of safety than not using two-factor authentication. Not to say that two-factor is an end-all, be-all, but it is definitely a security layer that you should have in place when it comes to cameras.
Well, Ring knows that they've got a problem. They share a lot of information. So what's your guidance on being able to see? Well, before we get to that, Paul, why would people want to use my camera? What would benefit them for breaking into my system so they can watch me?
Well, there's a couple of things there, and we saw a few years ago with nanny cams, right, that people were hacking in and, using the microphone to talk to people in the house, and so that's kind of scary, right, someone having access to those cameras and microphones. But the other thing we want to look at is what's the information they can gather if they have even an outside camera, right? And what we look at there is people are, we all work on patterns. We go to work the same time every day. And so if I have access to your camera, I'm going to know when you have packages and you're not home. I'm going to know when you come and go to work most frequently, when your house is empty. When we look at things like home invasion, if someone was to know that you're definitely not going to be home, as a rule, through these hours, you're putting your property at risk.
So this is used to case the joint.
It can be, among other things, and it, data we don't necessarily think about. We want to be able to see our front door, right, and see if someone's doing something they shouldn't be. But it's also tracking our actions as we come and go, and we go about our normal daily business.
I find this interesting in another respect. I went out and started looking for a camera that couldn't be hacked. And apparently there isn't one. The closest thing that I found was a couple of reviews that talked about using audio and no camera at your front door. Well, I want the visual. I want to see who's out there or across the street or whatever the case. And it turns out the smaller the services, if you just want audio, well, then that's good. But, if you want that Ring doorbell camera, and people do during these times, two-level authentication, we talked about that. That's pretty easy to set up. Where do you go from there, Paul?
Well, so we want to look at the network as a whole, right? So trying to find something that can't be hacked is virtually impossible. If it's connected to the internet, there's always a possibility, right? And so what we want to do is make sure that we're buying from vendors that have a good reputation, right? That we look them up, we know that they update their software on a regular basis, and they continue to add new security features to their systems, because that means that the manufacturer is going to be going a long way to help you. The other thing we want to look at is making sure that those devices are separate. We generally have a lot of IoT or Internet of Things devices, Google Home and those type of devices on our network. We want to keep those separate from the regular network that we have, let's say, our computers and so forth on. So if someone gets inside a camera, they can't move then to your computer or another device that has, your bank information on it and those kind of things. And with respect to the device itself, back to the manufacturer updating those devices, you want to make sure that you have a routine, just like you would check your smoke detectors, right, to make sure that those devices are up to date. Make sure that the updates are automatically applied and that you're going in to make sure that you have the latest firmware, because that's where your manufacturer is going to fix those security gaps for you.
You know, every time I do an interview that involves security like this, the more convenience you get, the more liability you seem to have.
It's the age-old security thing, right? Security is inconvenient, kind of no matter how you look at it. We don't like, it takes time to take your key out and put it in the door when you get home and unlock the door. But there's certain security we just have to have, whether it's inconvenient or not. It's kind of a toss-up at times. I would much rather be protected and go through those extra couple of seconds to do two-factor authentication than I would have somebody get into my systems.
Yeah, and I've got a dog at home that I feel we're pretty affectionate towards, too. I think, somebody would come in and hurt my dog. I don't care if they steal my TV, but I am going to find them later, and I'll need that picture to do that because I'll be finding them. You know what I mean? I want that little bit of control, and it's because we're out of control. I mean, there's so many things. You get that idea, and you say, I want this level of control for my home. Yeah, I'm curious about another thing. What obligations do I have when it comes to my neighbor and their expectation of privacy? Just because I want security doesn't mean they should give up their privacy. Is that an issue here, too, when it comes to security precautions?
It may be. I think, generally speaking, people try to aim cameras at their property or property lines. We certainly don't want to be recording the neighbor's backyard activities necessarily, or being intrusive in that manner.
But I can't help but think, last week, how many of those camera movies, how much of that film footage we saw with Ann Hesh came from a doorbell camera? We're literally watching each other. Neighborhood programs rings, that's one of their items.
Yeah, and that's really a society type question, right? And the cameras are everywhere, whether it's home security cameras, whether it's cameras on businesses. We have traffic control cameras now. I generally think when you go outside, just assume that you're on camera.
So do I.
Probably the best way to look at that.
No, and I do too. Paul Tracey's joining us this morning, CEO of Innovative Technologies. We're talking about your privacy on your door cams. It's interesting. I was reading a science fiction novel years ago, long before Ring doorbells, and all the security cameras. Like I said, if you're outside, somebody's taping you somewhere. And it was interesting. This author, it might have been Robert Heinlein or Isaac Asimov, one of the greats, has said that, this is coming in our society, and people will get used to it. It'll be like your dog watching you change clothes. That will become used to it. We're nowhere being watched. It's a dog, and I thought that was an interesting analogy.
It certainly is, and if we're not mindful, we are opening ourselves up to that thing. Camera placement inside your house when you're putting the cameras there. Generally, from a security standpoint, if we install security cameras for a company, we want to look at the entryways, right? And so not having general access to the inside of your, don't take that wide view. If you need to look at the entryways, make it specific to the entryways, and that way you're limiting, if someone did get in, how much they could be.
Right, and I've now that you've said that, I've seen some other footage that seems to indicate that. Before I let you go, Paul, I was wondering, final thoughts on this. When it comes to the prevalence of cameras, there's going to be more, not less, as we go forward. If you don't want somebody tinkering, and it's interesting that, Paul brought this up, they get in through the ring, but then if you've got it attached to the right system, maybe they're into your Google Home and can talk to you or your kids, or maybe they can look at the cameras you have inside your home, or maybe they can get all the way to your bank account. So, final thoughts on security. If you're thinking about security cameras, you can go out and get them for as little as $49, no problem. Right? Maybe it's a refurb, but you can get them out there for not much money. What's your idea from day one when you're setting it up? Set up the security protocols. Final thoughts?
Make sure that you're dealing with a reputable company from the start, right? Is always number one. Number two, when you start setting that up, make sure it's on a separate network. It's pretty quick to create a separate Wi-Fi or another network on your home router. You do that, you're going to mitigate the risk significantly from someone getting onto your computer where you're holding more personal data.
Can your internet company, as a rule, set that up? Having that one with, because I've got 2 networks in my home for just this reason, and I was wondering, is it easy to get those for people who are not indoctrinated, to get the company to say, look, I need this help, can you do that for me?
Yeah, generally you can call your internet provider and they can provision a second Wi-Fi and give you the password on the phone. It may take you 10 to 15 minutes, but it's really not anything difficult, and they should be able to do that quickly for you.
It's been my experience that it was, and you were right. About 10, 15 minutes, they were in my system, had it set up, and we had a new password, and we were ready to go, and don't make your password your dog's name. Guess we have to say that. Paul Tracey, CEO, Innovative Technologies. Hey, Paul, appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.